the last 7 years, how things seem to have fallen apart. I wrote a book about the origins of the modern world in 2016, and that is going to be published as the first half of a longer book. The second half is written now, and I was wondering why the attitude and the tone and the way I approached this was so different from that in 2016. That first part celebrated the technological and scientific and material development of different civilizations, why that happened, what effects it was happening, and the tone on the whole was cautiously optimistic, and the story was of the gradual development and then convergence of different ways of getting and keeping and using accurate, reliable knowledge, in other words, science. This second half is prompted by a number of changes. One of them, obviously, is in my own condition. I'm now 7 years older, just about to celebrate my 82nd birthday, and gradually I notice the signs of aging, occasional forgetfulness, but particularly physical, in that lifting things or walking far or other physical activities are now much more difficult. So one is aware that the body is weakening, and one is also aware that the surroundings to the body, one's social network, is in certain ways weakening too. Many lifelong or long-time friends are starting to die around my age or a little older, my teachers as well as members of the family, and so you feel increasingly alone, obviously with my wife and close family, but each time one of these often dear friends goes, it leaves a hole in the forest cover over one. So that's a second factor. The third one is the growing, and these other factors are at a much wider or a wider level. One of them is the effects of the Brexit vote in Britain, which again left one feeling isolated and sad that a dream of a united Europe had vanished, that hidden currents of dislike and distrust had overcome the natural British outward-looking attitude, and the consequence of that and many other things, of course, is that the British economy is stalled, and we find daily that the quality of living, which had constantly been rising, it seemed, until 2016, has got worse. The communications, the roads, the networks, the railways, more strikes, more potholes. It's more difficult to get things done. The postal service is collapsing. It appears that many other public facilities like the prison system, and people are struggling, and you hear of real hardship and people living on the streets and going to food banks and so on. So the British environment is getting worse, it appears, since 7 years ago. Then, if we were moved to the European level, we find that, again, the dream of a united liberal Europe has been shattered in various ways. One is obviously the fact that a number of right-wing governments have been elected. Europe is divided between a few remaining liberal democracies and autocracies and right-wing governments. But the major factor, of course, a great shock to everyone, is the Ukraine war, which has been going on for several years, is in complete stalemate, has led to, for a long time, nightly scenes on our television of people being killed and buildings being ruined, and the shock of discovering that what one thought had disappeared, which was warfare in Europe, was back again. A pointless, seemingly endless war not far away, which has also drained the economies of Europe, cut off their gas supplies, used up their money for more weapons and support for Ukraine. So Europe seems in a more powerless state, just as does Britain. And then when we look across the pond, as it's often called, the Atlantic, it's a scene of great sadness. The greatest democracy on earth, founded on dreams of the city on the hill, seems to have been shattered and descended into a country which is revealed daily to be militaristic, aggressive, confrontational, and internally moving very, very fast to a potential dictatorship with the re-election of Donald Trump. The scenes of Donald Trump's attempt to regain the White House, as well as many pictures from America, show an America which is increasingly divided economically, socially, racially, and whose many social services and developments are in jeopardy. So America, instead of being a beacon and a hope, has descended into the same powerless state. And along its southern border there are tragic scenes of waves of impoverished immigrants trying to get into America, and this takes one to another phenomenon which has really grown in those years, which is international migration. The flood of people was always potentially there, but in those 7 years it seems to have increased greatly, both in the Americas and as a result of the ill-advised and stupid wars in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and so on. So you've got waves of people coming from there and from Africa, and so the threat of migration and anti-migration pressures are much more at the forefront of our minds than they were 7 years ago. And another cataclysm of a growing kind is ecological destruction. We knew 7 years ago that we were heading towards a climate catastrophe and that we must keep carbon emissions down, and various agreements were made. These are not being held to as yet, and the situation is predicted to be extremely dire. But increasingly since that date, the symptoms, the signs, the outcrops of that failure become more apparent. There are numbers of fires, of floods, and the decimation of the natural world, the forests, the rivers, the oceans, the animal species, is more and more apparent day by day. So nature and the natural world is also in a state of apparent increasing collapse. Another huge change, of course, that has happened since then is in health, in the worldwide pandemic of COVID. Unimaginable before then. One had had no such event since 1917-18 influenza epidemic, and the fact that for a long time humans were more or less powerless against this new virus, and that millions died, that stupid decisions were made, has destabilized one's confidence, because nearly everyone predicts that this will not be the last pandemic, that viruses and bacteria change very fast and something else will come along. So the easy assumption that basically our medical science had got ahead of disease and that things were improving has been undermined as well. Another very recent sudden upsurge of anxiety arrives out of the progress of computing, and particularly artificial intelligence, because although the potential for such intelligence has been known since Turing's day in the 1930s, it's only really in the last 2 or 3 years that suddenly, with things like ChatGPT and other programs, we've become aware of what is called the approach of the singularity, when computers are more intelligent than human beings and could potentially wipe out human beings or use them as their pets, or minimally take away the last chunk of meaningful work among the professional classes, replacing most doctors and lawyers and academics and others. So mass unemployment or diversion of employment, as well as deeper threats in terms of AI, warfare, and so on. So all these different factors, in a way, have come to a head in scenes that we've been watching for the last 2 months now on our television scenes of the Israeli invasion of Gaza, where unimaginably we watch what looks like, and has been called by many organizations, genocide occurring, perpetrated by one of the most sophisticated and intelligent set of people on earth, and supported by the supposedly most enlightened international rule of law abiding countries, the United States. So again, all our all too easy assumptions have been shattered. Now, those are some of the things that have happened in those 7 years and lead me to write and think in terms of this second part of the book, because what seems most helpful to me are 2 things. One is to try and increase mutual understanding. One of the factors and changes I didn't mention between 2016 and the present is the new Cold War, which America has launched on China, trying to destabilize it, trying to stop its growth, and in various ways maintain America as the dominant power in the world. Now, that Cold War means that there is a constant and increasing air of suspicion, a sort of mild form of McCarthyism and Inquisition, anti-witchcraft sentiments in much of the West. And when we went to China a dozen times or more before 2016, it was in a world where the relations between the West and China were extremely good, and one felt very relaxed. In the last 7 years, increasingly, one has felt one is swimming against a tide of distrust and mutual misunderstanding. So that leads me to try and write about how we can understand each other. And so a good deal of the following text is about that, about what are the differences between us and how can we resolve them, and about how these differences emerged. And the story is again different from the first part, in that the first part stressed the evolution and growth of different forms of technology, change over time. The second part is trying to trace back to the origins of our divided and confrontational world. So it looks at the different streams or lives or trees, whatever metaphor you use, of different civilizations, the French and European, the British and American, the Chinese and the Japanese, and the Islamic and Jewish, to see how they have shaped what their basic character is, and how beneath the surface of modernity there lie many deep differences between our civilizations. Once we recognize them, then we can deal with them. It's like a language. Another language is different, but once we know that, we can start to learn it or understand it. The same with many other things. So it's not contributing to confrontation, it's trying to contribute to increasing collaboration, but in a world which maintains its essence, where one part of the world, which appears to be fairly rapidly decreasing in importance, that is the West, Western Europe and America and the Anglosphere, where that is decreasing in importance and the South and East are increasing. In that world, how are we going to live together? Well, one foundation of that living together will be to understand where we have all come from. We are now sitting in a room together, speaking different languages of culture, and we need to learn each other's language of culture. So that is why this second half is quite considerably different from the first, perhaps a little darker, and certainly emphasizing continuity and deep structural features more than the first. But it's another approach to the same problem. Where did we all come from, and where possibly are we going?